Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, July the 13th, 2026, and today we're going to break down beet production for the fall and take a question about growing cover crops for compost fodder. So let's do it. All right, happy Monday, everyone. I hope you all had lovely weekends. Ours was good here. The weather has cooled off a little bit, which is a nice change, and it's manageable. Went for a run with my oldest yesterday and played a lot of soccer with my youngest, but otherwise it was mostly relaxing. Because it keeps raining, stuff just keeps growing like wild, and I'm going to guess it's a good chanterelle season, in fact. In the forests, too, because consistent rains will keep them going throughout the summer, which is nice. On dry years, you don't get as many chanterelles, but I don't have a chanterelle patch anymore, so I guess I don't really know. Got the last round of tomatoes in as well, and then they got that nice little rain to settle them in. But the prep for that was super simple. I basically just pulled some landscape fabric down that I'd had over top of a couple beds of cover crops to kill the cover crops. And then I planted. This week, I got to get the onions out, finish the potatoes, normal July stuff. I've had some deer issues in the sweet potatoes. Again, normal July stuff. I largely attribute this to one of our neighbor's dogs no longer running wild, which was actually pretty helpful for keeping the deer out. So I threw up a makeshift fence, those 2 electric wires 4 feet apart, with an old Energizer that works somewhat intermittently. It doesn't always work, so I'm hopeful that will help with the deer. Hadn't had to protect against deer in a long while. Anyway, what's up on your all's plots? Let us know, or better yet, upload a 20-second farm video clip to Dropbox or Drive, and share that with Farmer Mike at no-tillgrowers.com. Seeing your farms and gardens is one of my personal favorite things about this show, so I always look forward to those. All right, so it is Monday, where every week this year we are digging into a single less talked about crop in a series we're calling Planting and Raving. Today, the crop we're going to cover is fall beets. I've done a beet video and a beet segments before, I think here or there, but I really wanted to dial into fall beets because 'tis the season. I love me some beets. I love me some fall beets. I think this is a great crop on many levels, relatively low in pest pressure, germinates well in the heat, grows well in low water conditions like the late summer. It tastes really good around the frosts, and it's a winner of a crop headed into the winter. So let's start on the variety front. Most beets do well going into the fall in general. The difference in day length is pretty minimal, where on the faster side, you have beets that will be ready in about 40-ish days or so, and on the slower side, it's around 55, though those slower beets might store slightly better. Most beets will store pretty well in the right conditions and when harvested at the right time. Again, more on all that in the next segment, a cliffhanger if ever there was one. So it's really a matter of picking the varieties that make the most sense for you and your context, and then going from there. What does your family or your market want? Some of my favorite flavor-wise are the long Cylindra beets. They store well, generally speaking. They're pretty. Chefs tend to like them, and the flavor is excellent. They are notably a little harder to sell at markets, just based on shape, but in terms of good eats, they are way up there. Zeppo and Merlin are solid round red beets that I've grown for many years. Zeppo tends to be a little smaller. It's kind of more of a baby beet, but they're both very tasty. Now, there are also pink striped beets like the Chioggia beet, also called candy striped beet, that are really nice. They're really pretty, but I do find them a little hard to sell. People often confuse them with large radishes or something. The white beets can be quite tasty, but again, the confusion with turnips is not always helpful at a busy farmer's market. So they are much more of a hand sell. Weird, as you will learn pretty quickly in your early years of trying to sell food, is not always good for every market. Sometimes, or maybe all the time, the classic stuff is just going to sell better. Chefs love that sort of stuff maybe, but everyone else is you got any red beets? Golden beets have some of my favorite flavor, and their popularity in the mainstream has picked up enough that I find they are not quite as hard to sell anymore, but may still take some good signage, good display, and a little hand selling. We would sometimes, when we were at the farmer's market, mix the red and gold together in some bunches just to try to get people to try them. It would work mostly, but again, sometimes people would just I'd look over and they'd be taking the red ones out and putting them in their own little bunches, which isn't super helpful to us. Now, there are a few varieties that do well for baby beets. Like I mentioned, they usually have smaller tops, but most can be grown that way too. That is to say, harvested early or harvested late. If you want a bigger beet, you're really only concerned with baby beets if you have a chef asking for them, because that can be a little bit of a hard sell at market as well. Now, I am mostly directly seeding my own beets personally. I used to do a lot of beet transplants, which works. and is good in the spring, in the early spring when you're trying to beat the season. But I find the shape is better when you directly seed them. And I also find they are just happier and healthier when directly seeded. Then, of course, the time you save directly seeding beets versus transplanting clusters of them is nothing to shake a stick at. I mean, you shouldn't shake a stick at anything. It's kind of dangerous. It's like I tell my children. But if you did want to transplant them, what I would normally do is sow 2 beet clusters because as you will remember, the seeds you buy are actually clusters of seeds called embryos. You would sow 2 of those and then thin them to no more than 3 beets per cluster in the blocks or at planting time. Also, there are beets that have fewer embryos per cluster, called like Moneta, I think is one, which I can find to be quite helpful in directly seeding so they don't get too dense, but might also make seeding into trays a little less complicated. I will talk about spacing for that stuff and for directly seeding in the next segment, but let's take a beet, see what I did there, and then get back to the whole planting and seeding and harvesting thing. BRB.
Want to harvest seeds adapted to your farm, but you're thinking, look, I have a market farm to run. I'm way too busy weeding and picking tomatoes. I'm Dan Briesbois, and I'm here to tell you that you can grow seed on your farm without losing your mind. On the Seed Farmer podcast, and in my book, The Seed Farmer, I share exactly how busy growers make seed crops work alongside a bustling farm business. Find The Seed Farmer wherever you get your books and podcasts. Go grow some seeds.
All right, planting, harvesting, storing, all the things. Let's do it. Now, we're going to start saving our Patreon questions for the end of the show just to shake things up a little bit, though I suppose you could argue that putting something in the middle of a beet segment was actually shaking things up more so. So maybe we're unshaking them. I don't know. Anyway, yes, beets. So I should add here that I love to prime my beet seeds before I sow them or plant them. Priming is when you soak the seeds overnight in a compost tea or extract, and then you dry them, and then you can plant them that way so that they germinate faster. This is definitely helpful in directly seeding crops like beets or like spinach. If you are indeed directly seeding beets, your weed control must be something you're wholly proud of before seeding because weeds will be your downfall here. Well, one of your downfalls. Another big challenge in your way is density. When you're directly seeding beets, you do want to make sure they are not too dense. My experience with, for instance, the beet plate on the earthway seeder is that it often seeds them way too tightly together, meaning you either have to block a couple of holes with a piece of tape or something, literally like take the seed plate and put a piece of tape over the hole, or thin the beets once they come up. It's easier to do it on the front end than the back end, just based on the amount of time it takes. I prefer the Jang seeder for beets, but it's several $100s more than the earthway and won't necessarily make you that much more money in beets. No matter what, you're really looking for around 3 inches between plants. So at least that's like 7 to 8 centimeters with 3 rows on a 30-inch bed. That's 75 centimeter bed, or 5 rows on a 48-inch bed, which would be 122 centimeters. The tighter the space, the smaller the beets. And when you sow them, they need to be really well watered in. Sometimes I will put one of the silage tarps white side up so that it just holds that moisture in, and then I'll pull that off before they germinate. A flame weeder may also come in handy. If you pull it off like maybe after 2 days and there's no beets up, a flame weeder, if you have one, it's a good time to use it. Also, in terms of fertility, a little compost is always a must. They do really well with compost, but beets really like their boron too, so make sure your boron levels are adequate. The beets, like with many fall brassicas, often benefit from a little kelp mixed in there as well. Now, if you're transplanting the clusters, I go with like a lettuce spacing, I guess, for multi-plant blocks. So that's like 7.5 by 7.5 inches on a grid. That'd be like 19 by 19 centimeters. Now, they will need consistent irrigation the whole way through, but like I said, they are decent in a drought. I think the big reason for this is that they build some of the best rhizosheaths of any crop we grow. The rhizosheaths are these lovely little collections of microbes and soil aggregates that sort of bind themselves around the roots and help to manage water around the roots for the crop in exchange for the sweet, sweet photosynthate that we call root exudates. It's like a little microbial blanket. It's very cute. Now, I find for the best greens that growing them with a little shade for a while can help. 30% shade is fine. I also get the best beet greens when they are interplanted with taller crops or when they are grown in the greenhouse. In short, they like their diffused sunlight, especially in the heat of the summer. Pest-wise, there's not a ton. Blister beetles can do some damage. Deer will eat the baby greens. Sometimes you'll get pill bugs that will eat around the base of the beet, which is not my favorite, because that really hurts the marketability. If those are issues for you, insect netting will help establish them and protect them from things like deer. Rake any heavy mulch out from around the beets before you plant, and that will help as well for the beets, for the roly-poly little adventurers. Now, on the disease front, Cercospora leaf spot is, from my experience, the biggest disease, a fungal pathogen that we get, which is often caused by a mix of warmth and wetness and poor fertility. This is another reason I find they thrive in a tunnel. The leaves can stay dry, which is a big part of why they get sick. So just make sure if they are in a tunnel that they have adequate airflow so they don't also get something like downy mildew. The spots really kill the marketability as well, and there is not a ton you can do once you get it. So avoid overhead watering if you can, at least throughout, once they get established. Also, though, the end of the summer is nice here for that disease because it does tend to be dry here, so the leaves don't get as wet. I mean, we have heavy dews, though, so that doesn't help. But in general, it's helpful. Then, for harvest, you want to harvest before the first hard frost if you can. You don't have to. It will damage the leaves, but the beets will mostly be fine as long as they don't get super, super hard frosted.
Now, I want to add one thing about harvesting. What some people will say, and I've tried this a bunch of times, would be that if I was to harvest this beet here, right, this bigger beet of these two in this cluster, that this one would size up well. In my experience, if you harvest this one won't size up a whole lot, maybe a little bit. And maybe if you give it enough time and fertility and water and stuff, maybe it'll size up okay. But my experience is you just let these two grow as long as you can, and then you're going to harvest a slightly larger beet and a slightly smaller beet. Yep.
If wanting to keep those greens on, harvest, wash, dry, and then pack them in bins for up to 10 days, though I don't usually go that long because they will lose a little bit of their sweetness. A week with tops on is about as far as I would go. For storage beets, the greens have to come off or the greens will suck the life and thus flavor literally out of their beets. So you take those greens off at harvest and they can be stored for 4 to 6 months in refrigeration temperatures with high humidity. Usually growers use perforated bags for this, as sealing them off completely is a great way to make, slimy pre-digested beet sauce. It's very gross. Make sure the beets are clean and dry going into storage and to check them regularly just to make sure there are no bad apples in there, or apples at all. Apple snuck in there. I don't know what that would mean. But anyway, I guess that's about it for the beetness. Did I miss anything there? Let me know. Otherwise, we're going to take one last quick break and then get a question from our Patreon mailbag about cover crop mix for compost fodder. Be right back.
Farmer Claire Coleman here from the Winter Growers Podcast. Did you know that I also founded Real Farmer Care, a nonprofit that supports farmer well-being? From my own experiences farming, I knew firsthand that this type of support was missing from ag, so I decided to do something about it. As of today, there are over 500 farmer recipients of a $100 self-care award, with more applying daily. If you'd like to help, each $100 donated supports one new farmer. Visit realfarmercare.com to donate and learn more. Again, that's realfarmercare.com.
Hi, are you a listener or viewer who is enjoying this podcast? Awesome. Getting even a small amount of value from it? Even better. You could consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but the reality is Patreon questions are always at the top of that list for keeping the show alive. So anyway, today's Patreon mailbag question comes to us from Patreon member Loke Nielsen, who writes, quote, "Hi, questions about cover crops, but for harvesting. I've had a neighbor till up large parts of our lawn that I do not intend to grow food in, at least for now, and seeded it with flower and cover crops. I want to benefit pollinators, but also build better soil if I ever need that stretch of land for food production. My season is quite short. My current mix is Cerodella, bird's foot, crimson clover, lacy phacelia, vetch, sunflower, narrow-leafed lupin, and rye. I plan to cut, collect, and compost plant material from the field at the end of season. My question, what plants might I add or remove from this mix? Should I consider root depths when I decide which plants to use together? How much material do I leave in the field to keep it healthy? I suppose I shouldn't take too much for my compost pile. Should I fertilize the field with, for example, some composted manure on top of the plant residue? Or can I rely entirely on the cover crops themselves for fertility and do the same thing again next year?" End quote. All right, so lots going on here, but fun questions, Loke. let's go question by question, and we'll just see what happens. You asked what plants might you add or remove from this mix, which for the listener was Ceradella, Crimson Clover, Lacy Phacelia, Vetch, Sunflower, Lupin, and Rye. And in general, for what you laid out there, I think that is a fine mix for your goals. I don't really see any major missing pieces as long as you maintain that rye or some sort of grain. Obviously, you will have to resow this mix every year as well in your region, just because it is all going to be annual there. You also asked if you should consider root depths, and no, not really. You should have a nice mix of root depths in there already. I wouldn't, for instance, just plant a bunch of deep rooters and no shallow rooters or vice versa, but you're good to go on this particular mix. Another question was how much material to leave in the field to keep it healthy. Well, all of it, actually. But since that's not really your goal here, you do have some options. You can get more perennial crops involved that are better cut and come again crops than those you selected, many of which will grow back, but not all. The rye, vetch, and Ceradella, for instance, you can cut those high, remove that material to the compost pile, and then those plants will grow back pretty well and grow soil at the same time. The Lacy Phacelia, sunflowers, and potentially like that lupin may have a harder time with that regrowth stage, however. So to the fertility question, it just depends on if you are producing for regrowth or cutting it clean and replanting. If cutting it clean, then yes, some fertility will eventually be required or at least desired. You can fertilize with a little bit of compost tea or fish hydrolysate, etc., to help spread out the use of any compost you might be using, or a little dried chicken manure would go a long way here. The only way I've really seen this done commercially is with plots of white clover that are mowed and collected using a flail mower collector, and then removed to another area as a mulch. That way the clover sort of regrows itself and creates some of its own nitrogen, obviously. So you could also just simplify it to just clovers and maybe a grain in there. But then you'd have to, obviously, as soon as you get perennials involved, you'd have to replow when you wanted to use it later. And you may have to do that anyway. Depends on, how your weed management goes. Anyway, was that helpful? I hope so. Let us know your thoughts and insight, listeners and viewers. Otherwise, I think Monday, we're done here. Don't forget, No-Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like. You got to hit the like button or the subscribe button and or the follow button wherever you are getting this podcast. That is an easy way to help us out as well. If you're like, I like this work, enough to hit a button on my phone, then you should do that. It's super helpful to us. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor this show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Big thank you to Michelle. Big thank you to the No-Till Growers Board of Directors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can jam to. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support this work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you sign up in the month of July, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Jeff Vredenberg. I think I got that close. A lot of consonants back to back in that one, but I tried. So big shouts to you, Jeff. All right, so in this week's story that will really only be 2 days long for reasons that will make sense later, Woodrow has grown up poor and worked, hard his whole life, often doing 2 jobs at once just to pay the bills. He'd never had anything handed to him until they handed him $500 million, they being the executors of his favorite uncle's will that no one had any idea he was that rich. A random investment in Apple back in the day turned out to be a good call for that uncle. But anyway, here Woodrow was wealthier than he ever thought possible or ever thought he would be. And sure, people dream of how they would spend the money, that amount of money, especially when they don't have much of anything. But Woodrow had always known there was only one way he was ever going to spend the money if he ever got rich, beyond, getting out of debt, of course, and helping his mama get a new, house with working appliances. That was a key. But that is for tomorrow on New Money. Thanks for watching and or listening. We'll see you then. Bye.